Everybody remembered where they were, what they had been doing, when the SCP Foundation revealed themselves to the world. It was an event that had so fundamentally changed the lives of every person on Earth that it became pretty hard to forget that momentous, horrible day, even though for most people, it had begun as a day like most others. Dane Moss had been at home when it started. His roommates were talking about buying an air hockey table for their place, something to liven up their Saturday nights. Even as he half listened to them discussing it, Dane figured it would never happen. He was right, of course, but he never could have anticipated the thing that stopped it. All of them had stopped and fallen silent as the news report came through. A group calling themselves the SCP Foundation, previously responsible for the containment of anomalous objects, entities, and phenomena, had declared its new intention to exterminate the entire human race. Dane's split-second belief that the broadcast was a Cloverfield-style viral marketing stunt for a new movie was quickly disproved when the ground started to shake. Unbeknownst to him, the Foundation was not only real, but had detonated nuclear charges along the back of SCP-169, an enormous ancient arthropod that's body had made up an archipelago adrift in the ocean. The detonation caused the Leviathan to stir, resulting in massive earthquakes and tsunamis. Dane was the only one to make it out of the apartment alive. Elsewhere, Joe Reese had been grabbing a coffee on his way home from work. He briefly overheard the news report, but barely paid it any mind. Then, waiting for his flat white, wondering what the holdup was, he caught a part of a conversation between two people behind him. "What is that thing?" one asked. "I don't know, but its face is pure nightmare fuel," the other replied. "A bunch of pictures of it just appeared on everyone's socials. It's really freaky stuff." A sudden shriek went out from a number of the coffee shop patrons. Joe noticed a towering humanoid shadow being cast by something behind him. Its arms were stretched out disproportionately long, and it was attacking the two people behind him. Acting on an instantaneous fight-or-flight response, Joe ran, without looking back to see SCP-096 slaughtering everyone that had seen its face. Around the same time as the Foundation's ominous announcement was played over every news channel on the planet, Renee Hudson and Sky Soto had been on a date. The pair of them had been enjoying hanging out, playing a few mildly competitive games at the bowling alley, but there was still something unspoken lingering in the air. Neither Sky nor Renee really felt any connection. They liked each other's company, but that was as far as it went. Although neither one of them knew how to broach the subject for fear of hurting the other's feelings, and in the same vein, neither of them could have predicted the commotion that would happen next. The noise came from outside, the deafening screams followed by a flood of people running for their lives. Hundreds, if not thousands, were fleeing, any that fell over in the street being trampled underfoot by everyone behind them. Human beings moved like a mass of ants clambering over each other to get away from a gigantic, ferocious lizard. Despite the news broadcast declaring themselves and their intentions to wipe out all of humanity, nobody on the ground would ever be able to comprehend just why the Foundation unleashed SCP-682 and allowed the hard-to-destroy reptile to slaughter innocent civilians in droves. While they didn't know it, or may not have agreed, Sky, Renee, Dane, and Joe were all lucky to have survived the initial anomalous onslaught unleashed by a rogue SCP Foundation. It did little to ease the pain of being displaced from their homes, forced to migrate across the country to join camps of other survivors, made refugees by anomaly attacks, and the efforts of apathetic agents of the Foundation. And of the four of them, not one could have predicted the shared fate that awaited them. During the months in the wake of the Foundation's opening assault on mankind, Renee and Sky had mostly stuck together. They had moved further and further south, managing to stay safe. Neither one had thought about their awkward date in months. They were just grateful to have someone they knew to stick together with. Meanwhile, Joe and Dane were hopping from one refugee camp to the next much in the same way, moving north and eastward, respectively. After deploying their first wave of anomalies, the SCP Foundation's efforts had shifted to primarily focusing on groups of interest that could pose a threat to their plans. While organizations with knowledge of the anomalous, like the Global Occult Coalition, were among the first in their crosshairs, the civilian population was left living in fear, but unscathed. That is, until the Foundation began targeting the refugee camps. One of their tactics was to unleash SCP-2241, a 7-year-old boy with reality-warping powers, into survivor communities to act as a living weapon, destroying the larger refugee camps. It was the increased frequency and ruthlessness of the Foundation's attacks on human survivors that forced Sky, Renee, Dane, and Joe to unknowingly converge on each other. Camps for survivors started getting smaller, consisting of only a handful of people, in the hopes that this would make it easier for them to avoid detection by the Foundation. Arriving and hopping off the back of a jeep with only the clothes on their backs, the 4 strangers exchanged uncertain glances. They had been brought to an abandoned dock, the wreckage of an overturned cargo ship laying on its side in the harbor. Shipping containers were scattered all around, looking as if they had spilled out of the boat and onto the dock. The driver of the jeep hadn't told them where to go from there. Instead, he had just driven off without so much as a word. The 4 of them looked around. Dane seemed particularly unnerved at being so close to the water, despite it having been months since the Leviathan settled back to sleep. Suddenly, one of the shipping containers burst open, and a broad flannel shirt-wearing man stepped out. His face was buried beneath a thick beard, a shotgun resting against his shoulder as he approached the group. The man's stern, stony expression quickly changed into a wide grin as he jovially and unexpectedly pulled Dane into a hug.
"Welcome, my friends!"
The man roared with laughter.
"Oh, welcome!"
Who are you?" Sky asked.
Of course, allow me to introduce myself,"
he responded, letting go of Dane, who needed to catch his breath after being squeezed so much.
"My name is Joviannis. For safety, I watch over this camp,"
the man announced. Camp? Joe asked, looking at the wreckage.
"The Foundation has been getting more zealous with targeting those of us that are left,"
Joviannis explained, gesturing for the 4 to follow him as he walked back towards the container.
"So we had to take a less conspicuous approach to surviving, splitting the camps up into fewer people, dispersing everyone around a bit more, and of course,"
he swung open the door to the metal container. Inside the cramped space, there were 2 bunks either side, one above the other, making 4 in total, along with a sleeping bag on the floor.
"Staying in place is the Foundation one thing to look," Joviannis continued.
"We have to sleep in here?" Renee asked in disbelief.
"Better for avoiding detection," the camp's protector replied. "Otherwise, the next camp along is only 20 minutes away on foot, over in a warehouse, if you'd rather go there, but be warned, they have rats."
Although it came with a brief adjustment period, the group quickly acclimatized to living in the abandoned dock. Each of them came to appreciate Joviannis' efforts to keep them all fed with what few rations they had. The 4 of them started calling him Big Joe, referring to Joe as Lil Joe to avoid confusion. Of the group, Dane seemed to have the hardest time adapting. He was something of a conspiracy theorist, anxiously talking about the other great disasters throughout human history and wondering if the Foundation had been responsible for them all. Sky felt a little sorry for him, so they decided to humor his theory that the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in Pompeii was also the SCP Foundation's doing, despite occurring all the way back in 79 AD. Through all their various concerns about surviving in this anomalous apocalyptic world, Big Joe seemed to have a talent for keeping the group's spirits up. Whether it was by recounting them all with folk stories or turning bland food rations into more flavorful meals, he made the 4 of them feel safe, especially with his weapon never far away. That is, until one evening. A glowing red streak shot through the air not far from camp, catching Joviannis' immediate attention. It was an emergency flare, set up by the neighboring camp at the warehouse. Something was wrong. Grabbing his shotgun and urging Sky, Dane, Renee, and Lil Joe to stay put, Big Joe left, running off into the growing dark of the night to try to help. The whole group stayed awake, waiting for their protector to return, the next hour feeling like an eternity. By the time he returned, the sun had fully set outside. Even by the low light of their lamps inside the container, it was clear by his face that any and all optimism had drained out of Joviannis.
"There was nothing left of all. There was nothing left. All of them were gone,"
he explained, unable to believe what he had seen.
"There was this oil everywhere, corrosive like an acid, just burning through what was left of them."
Trying to regain some semblance of composure, he urged the group to get some sleep, reassuring them that they would be safe for the rest of the night. Not one of them realized just how wrong they were, or that they'd never seen Joviannis again after they fell asleep. Renee was the first to discover he had gone missing, screaming with panic, waking up Sky and the two boys. After they had calmed down, Sky tried to rationalize what was going on. They were worried about Big Joe and the others, but he couldn't afford to lose their nerve and potentially attract the attention of a Foundation kill squad. "It's the Foundation," Dane babbled, terrified. "They found us. They're closing in. Oh, man." "Relax," Sky replied. "All of you chill. There are other camps nearby. Maybe Big Joe went to check on them too. See if what had happened to the warehouse group happened anywhere else. You don't think he would have told us?" Lil Joe retorted, seeming to be the least concerned about Joviannis' whereabouts. "We were asleep. It's not like him to wake us up. He knows we'd worry," Sky answered. "Well, what if he's dead?" Renee sobbed. "Don't say that," they replied. "She's right, though. He left his shotgun right here." Joe interjected again. "Whatever got the warehouse group killed him. It's obvious. At least I don't have to go by that stupid nickname anymore." "What the hell, man?" Dane yelled. "You're joking at a time like this? What's wrong with you?" There was an uncomfortably long pause. Everyone in the container turned to look at Joe, leaning against one of the metal walls with his arms folded. The other three were all thinking the same thing, although Dane was the first to say it aloud. "You killed him, didn't you?" "Don't be ridiculous!" Joe chastised him, backing away slightly, betraying his own little hint of fear. "You and Renee are hysterical. You both need to calm down." Before Joe could finish his sentence, a withered arm reached out of the wall and grabbed his throat. It looked like the rotting, decaying arm of a corpse, protruding out of a puddle of black mucus that now seemed to be spreading across the inner wall of the container. Renee screamed in horror as more of the black substance oozed from the arm, melting away Joe as it held him helplessly in its grip. It was then that a face peered through the oily patch smeared on the wall, the nightmarish visage of SCP-106, the Old Man. For a second, Sky thought about trying to help Joe. They could have pulled him free, but it was already too late. The corrosion was spreading. It looked like it would melt them too if they so much as touched it. Joe was gone. The remaining three of them burst out of the shipping container they had called home, afraid for their lives. "What the hell was that?" Dane screamed. "Oh man, I knew it. They've sent a monster after us." Sky barely paid him any mind, their attention grabbed by movement nearby. Someone had started running the second they had exited the shipping crate. They had been watching from a distance. Hey, stop!" Sky yelled, about to run after them. "Sky?" Renee's voice was cracking under the weight of her terror. Turning around, they saw it. The old man stood behind Renee. It looked even more grotesque under the low light provided by several distant fires in the ruins of cities the Foundation had destroyed, giving the horizon a hellish glow. SCP-106's withered, lipless face bore his rotting teeth, locked in a skull-like grin. It gave a sense he was gaining some twisted enjoyment out of what he did next. Renee had been frozen to the spot, sniffling in fear, her legs rigid and locked in place, until the old man clamped a hand over her shoulder. Then she cried out in a blood-curdling shriek of agony. More of the black ooze spilled from his emaciated fingers, dripping down her front while Sky looked on in terror. Renee had been the one person who had been with them the entire time, from the moment the Foundation unleashed hell. Every camp they moved to, Renee was in the same one with them. The pair of them may have not been a couple, but she had been the only constant in this anomalous apocalypse. And now, this sinister SCP was killing her. Fighting every urge to grab Renee and pull her free, Sky instead let themselves be led away by Dane. Choking back tears, they ran alongside him in the direction of whoever had been watching them. The shadowy figure was just about visible, although definitely still close enough to be heard. In the dark, there was the sound of a fall, accompanied by a pained grunt, indicating that whoever had been watching the container had tripped. Both Dane and Sky knew that this was their chance. Together they lunged at the figure before he had a chance to scramble back to his feet, with Dane pinning the observer down by his wrists. That was when the light of the burning city on the horizon illuminated his face. He was the Jeep driver, the one who had dropped them at Joviannis' camp to begin with, the only other person, apart from Big Joe, who knew where their camp was. "You!" Sky declared. "What were you doing spying on us?" "I have nothing to say to you," the man spat. "Answer their question!" Dane yelled, slapping the man in the face, although he didn't seem to react. "What is this thing chasing us? Why did it kill our friends?" "You might as well tell us," Sky told him calmly. "After all, once that monster catches up, we'll all be dead. You were watching, expecting a result, right? Had to make sure none of us made it. Not that there's anyone left for us to tell if we did survive. He's with the Foundation, Dane gasped, catching on quickly. You had them send that corpse thing to kill us, man! SCP-106, the undercover MTF agent corrected. And yeah, it's here because we sent it. You all went underground hiding in your little camps. We had to look even closer to find you all. Ungrateful, all of you. Ungrateful! Sky exploded, enraged and offended at the idea anyone could justify all the death the Foundation had unleashed on the world. What, you expect us to thank you for hunting your fellow human beings to extinction? Dropping nightmare after nightmare on us, and we're meant to be grateful for that? None of you understand what we're trying to do, the Foundation agent replied without a hint of remorse. What we're trying to do is bigger, more important than your mundane little lives. The only way we can save humanity from it is by wiping you out. Before either Sky or Dane could ask what it was, a gloopy, oily smear appeared on the ground. Clawing his way out of it, the old man reached for the MTF operative, disintegrating him like he had done before. But the agent barely reacted, didn't cry out like Renee or Joe had. He was still, even as he was being melted by the slimy black secretion of SCP-106. It was as if the man couldn't feel the pain of what was happening to him as he died. A splatter of the same corrosive mucus spread onto Dane's sleeve. Freaking out as it began burning through his jacket, he desperately tried to wipe it off, only to smear it, spreading the dissolving substance further and crying out as he felt it eating into the palms of his hands. SCP-106 climbed out of its oily puddle, dropping the disintegrating MTF agent. He disappeared into the corrosive pool, vanishing from sight like he'd fallen into a ditch. Sky backed away, their eyes locked with the sunken stare of the old man, feeling their legs begin to freeze in fear just like Renee's. Gun! Dane rasped, laying at SCP-106's feet, slowly succumbing to the same fate that had befallen the others. Big Joe's gun! He rasped again. With the last of his strength, he used his arm to grab the old man's ankle, howling in pain as more of the black substance oozed from the monster's wrinkled flesh. Sky turned and raced back towards the shipping container, hardly daring to look over their shoulder. Every movement, every tiny shift of shadow they detected in the corner of their eye filled their mind with the images of the old man bearing down on them, wearing that sadistic, skeletal grin. Sky pulled the heavy metal door open, using all their strength to get back inside. Their arms were numbed, trembling so much with terror that it was like they weren't attached properly. They fumbled about in the dark, their fingers brushing up against the weapon, resting in the corner where Joviannis had left it. Pulling on the pump, Sky turned, the gun raised, knowing that the old man was right behind them, and pulled the trigger. It gave a redundant click. It was empty, no ammunition. The gun had been just for show. SCP-106 reached for the weapon and pulled it from Sky's hands, the metal of it slowly melting as it was coated in the tar-like corrosive substance. Recoiling their hands from it, Sky went to dash for the door, only to feel the old man's bony, burning fingers hook into their back and drag them towards the greasy black stain he was leaning out of, pulling them into his domain. This world had been a living nightmare since the Foundation had revealed itself and unleashed an anomalous apocalypse upon humanity. But SCP-106's pocket dimension might just have been worse. Now go and check out SCP-5000, the full story compilation, and SCP-106 Containment Breach if you'd like a little more of this particular flavor of existential nightmare.